You don't really think about segregation at all that much these days unless you belong to one of the marginalized groups that were on the oppressed end of the spectrum when it came to it. Still, one need only look as far as Laurel Grove North versus Laurel Grove South for a strong visual aid in bringing the lesson on segregation home. One of the main reasons Laurel Grove South looks so different from its northern iteration comes down to both poverty and oppression. Several of the graves relocated from the, quote, old Negro cemeteries of Whitefield and Calhoun Squares in Savannah didn't have markers. Back in the day, both the Whitefield and Calhoun African burial grounds tended toward African-held traditions of burying a person with their personal effects or leaving their personal effects atop their graves. Many of the original graves of the two aforementioned historical squares were never even relocated to Laurel Grove South, and once this new cemetery began accepting burials for the people of color of the time, their traditional practices were entirely discouraged. Oftentimes, if the graves in the newly minted cemetery did have a grave marker, it was most likely made out of wood and thus susceptible to the elements, rotting away with the passage of time. Stone markers, after all, cost money, and slaves weren't paid for their work. That is why today, there are vast tracts of space within Laurel Grove South with nary a marker in sight. There are several notable civil rights leaders and a fair few number of notable black preachers interred at Laurel Grove South. One such figure is Wesley Wallace Law, who was instrumental in the desegregation of the Savannah city schools. The ghost stories about Laurel Grove South largely go hand in hand with the same ones mentioned in the cemetery files for its northern counterpart. The trolley with the crying baby, the sound of footsteps following visitors, the sensation of being watched, etc. Adding to that, locals swear to it that the remnants of voodoo rituals have been found in both north and south, and there have been reports of spectral hands reaching out from behind gravestones to snatch at passerby. On my visit to this portion of Laurel Grove Cemetery, I found a grave that struck me as exceedingly poignant. It reads, "In memory of Old Tom, faithful servant for 50 years of Captain John F. Wheaton, died February 11, 1904, age 96. Before the stone, the iron cross marking familiar to me to signify a Confederate is interred below or within. A modern wooden marker giving this man's full name back of Thomas Williamson. I needed to know more, so I looked. Tom was the slave of Captain John Wheaton and served as a soldier for the Confederate States of America. There was a newspaper clipping on his Find a Grave profile that stated that he had fallen into a ditch on his way home, and too feeble at the age of 96 to pick himself up, he froze to death, dying of exposure before he could be found. He is one of only 2 residents of Laurel Grove South who has the Southern Cross of the Confederacy next to his final resting place. I didn't see the other one. If you come to Savannah, I highly recommend making this cemetery one of your stops in addition to Bonaventure, my little strangelings. History is doomed to repeat itself, lest we forget, and Laurel Grove North and South are stark reminders as to why we shouldn't."